Hey there, Javalock here. So, before I get into talking about how to build a campaign, I think we should spend a little bit of time talking about the different campaign types. Now, generally speaking, there's about 5 different campaigns. So when it comes to campaign type, I won't say that there's really a better campaign, but I will say that choosing the best campaign type really depends on a balancing act between the DM and the player. If you have a chance to talk to your players before the campaign starts, ask them what they like in a campaign or what they kind of expect from it. Also, if you have a story that doesn't really fit what your players want, maybe do some fine tuning and adjust it to add a little bit of those aspects here and there. Now, as a DM, you don't have to bend to the will of your players. If you have a story in mind that doesn't really fit what they're looking for, either consider tweaking it or just letting them know ahead of time. Trust me, this will make the game much more enjoyable. Okay, now let's move on to those campaign types. I'm also going to tell you some kind of pros and cons of each type, and hopefully that helps you understand a bit more about them and which one to choose. So probably the most well-known, especially for 5th edition, is the hack and slash. Now the hack and slash campaign consists of a high majority of combat-focused adventuring, with very little role-playing involved. You typically only have small breaks in action, and usually that's just to get to a place where you can do more hack and slashing. So the pros of this campaign type is that it's actually relatively easy for new players to get involved. Because you don't have to really worry about roleplay or too much realism, players don't have to worry about all the other nuances that come with the typical D&D campaign. So again, it's perfect for new players and old players alike. One thing I want to mention about these campaign types is how we define what makes them different. Now, most people will say their composition is what makes them different. What they actually do in the campaign. But I kind of like to describe it more as how you solve problems or how you progress in the campaign. So, for the hack and slash, even though a hallmark of that campaign is that it consists mostly of combat, what really sets it apart is that combat is going to be how you progress through the campaign almost 95% of the time. I like to define these campaigns more as how you progress in them, not really what they're made of, even though that is important. Alright, moving on to the next campaign type, let's talk about the dungeon crawler. So the dungeon crawler is a lot like the hack and slash. There's a lot of combat involved, but what makes it different in terms of its composition is that it has a lot of puzzle solving, exploration, and very small role-playing opportunity. Also, the dungeon crawler is going to focus a lot on skills, and it's typically kind of a do-or-die kind of campaign. Another thing that makes the dungeon crawler kind of unique is that even though there's a lot of different routes to take and there's different objects to find, the campaign can be overall pretty linear. There's not really a lot of room to kind of grow or expand or really complete the campaign other than what's given in front of you. So the next type of campaign is called the adventuring campaign. Now this is probably the most standard of the campaign types. Here you're going to have a lot of balance between combat, role-playing, problem-solving, strategy, all sorts of things. Also, like the dungeon crawler, the adventuring campaign is going to be kind of limited and a bit linear. Typically speaking, players are going to have a goal and they're just going to kind of go through the motions to get that goal achieved. Now what makes it different from a hack and slash or a dungeon crawler is that this time you're going to have multiple ways to progress through the problems in the campaign. Alright, now the next type of campaign is called the questing campaign. The questing campaign is going to be a lot like the adventuring campaign. Its composition is going to be a nice mixture of combat, role-playing, and skill checks. Now unlike the questing campaign, you're typically going to have a higher level of narrative in a questing campaign. The DM is going to have his own overarching story, and there's a lot of moving parts in what's going on in the game. Now, the questing campaign is my favorite type of campaign. It's going to have, like I said before, a good mix of everything you want in a role-playing game, but it also has a narrative and a point, and it's a lot of fun to kind of play around with how your characters really develop and how they affect the game that they're in. Now, the downside to questing campaigns is that while it does have a good mix of combat, role-playing, and skill checks, Players who want more of one side of that pie tend to be pretty disappointed. Also, because questing campaigns have a higher level of narrative, they can take a long time to complete. It's important as a DM to figure out a good estimate of time it's going to take to actually finish the campaign. While you're building the campaign, this estimate will help you make sure you don't run into pacing issues or overstuffing events. Because of these issues, I would say that the questing campaign is probably the hardest to pull off correctly. That being said, it's definitely worth a try, and typically questing campaigns are the most memorable. And the final type of campaign is the dramatic campaign. Now, a dramatic campaign has very little combat involved, and is typically comprised mostly of role-playing elements. Further, the way that you proceed in the campaign is going to be through more role-playing and player interactions rather than combat or skill checks. Also, like the questing campaign, dramatic campaigns tend to have an overarching narrative to them. Unlike the hack and slash, most of your progression is going to be based on character interactions. I don't play a dramatic campaign very often because I'm kind of a bad actor, but if you really enjoy character development playing in the game world, I highly recommend you try a dramatic campaign. And there you have it. Those are the 5 basic campaign types. Now in these main types, there are tons of different subsets that we can get into. And maybe one day we'll explore those a little bit more. But those are the 5 basic ones. So I hope you found this conversation useful. And that's basically all I have to say. So you know the drill, like, comment, subscribe, yada yada, and I'll see you guys next time.